Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and given that Nintendo doesn't seem to care if I make weird Pokemon, I figured why not make some more, specifically a realistic Charizard. And so naturally that means starting with a metal straw. You see, the last time I made a little flame dragon Pokemon, I forgot to actually light his tail on fire and my comments section exploded. So this time I'm not making any mistakes and I'm baking the flame tail into the design from the outset. And what's more, I want the tail to light up like a proper gout of fire, so once I've wrapped the straw in a thick layer of weight-reducing aluminum foil and snapped the excess off the tail, I'll run a length of heat-resistant wiring down the tube and out the bottom. This should, in theory, keep my wire nice and safe while I work on the rest of the sculpture, as well as give me a solid mounting point for Charizard to attach to later. Otherwise, once I've got my wire in place and a body of shiny aluminium built up, I can start to slap on an initial layer of clay to cover all the shiny bits beneath. A quick smoothing and blending will hide the seams, and I decided that rather than work around the extra long cable, I'd just snip it off and solder a new wire in place later. To make the head, I'll attach the bottom and top jaw, then thicken up the brown, beginning adding bits of clay here and there to bring me a little bit closer to the shape I want. Whenever I make these, it's whatever but realistic, I try and stick to the original design as much as I can while mostly adding plenty of extra depth and texturing to make it look, well, if not realistic, at least a little bit less cartoony. Besides, I think we can all agree that titling the video I made a slightly more detailed Charizard with a bit more texture and kinda slightly more realistic proportions doesn't have quite the same ring to it. All that to say, at this point I've taken the standard Charizard design and sharpened its features, as well as added a couple lizard-like additions in the way of ear holes and cheek tissues and wrinkly skin to make it look a little bit more like a real-life dragon, I guess. For something like Charizard, I think the reel and reeling process comes by adding a copious amount of texture and detail to its otherwise flat and textureless torso. I'm going with the traditional dinosaur look by giving its neck plenty of wrinkles and veins and what other weird goopy loopy bits and bobs I think help make it look a little bit less smooth. However, as has become a bit of a recurring theme on this channel, once I'd put all that time and effort into making my head look nice and clean and realistic, I realized it's roughly 50% too big. Normally this just means taking the rest of the body and making it bigger in turn, but I'm limited by the amount of weight my future wire can support, so I'm gonna have to start over. So once I've chopped the head down to just under the size I want for the final shape, I can start rebuilding the head, staying hyper vigilant to remain within the confines of the scale I've chosen. At this point, I've come to terms with my excess head syndrome, but a lifetime of not being able to wear hats has inevitably tainted my ability to perceive accurate cranial dimensions. Anyways, with a new, smaller, sleeker, faster face in place, I can start sticking some pre-baked teeth into Charizard's mouth, deviating from the two-tooth design of the original, before cleaning up the inside of the mouth a bit and moving back to the neck to re-add all the veiny, goopy, loopy bits that I had to remove to make way for a freshly designed noggin. With the head and neck back to where they were before, I can start to clean up the shape of the torso, which, despite proving potentially problematic for aerodynamics, I'm gonna keep as a big belly with a pair of impressive pecs. Finally, before I bake this bad boy for the first time, I'll poke some armholes and break out my pre-made scale stamp to make some perfectly scaled scales on Charizard's upper portion, followed by a smaller dotted roller that I'll use to add some much finer pimply texturing around the face and hidden parts of the horns and all over the belly and tail. Before I toss this turd in the oven though, I'll clean up some of the detail the texture rollers rolled over and add some scars and battle damage to the face and neck. Then once the bodies come out of the oven and cool down, I can drill a set of 4 holes and fill them with some matching pairs of armature wire that can then be bent at appropriate angles to become the bones of my body parts. I'll thicken the legs up with a bit more foil and I can start slapping on a layer of arm and leg clay, then add a nice long wormy dealy down Charizard's back to bulk out its spine, as well as add some shorter worms along the side of the tail to give it a bit more bulk. I'll then work my way around the freshly added limbs, adding little bits of clay here and there to both blend the fresh clay and the existing torso together, as well as refine the shape of the limbs so they look a little less like awkwardly attached sausages. A couple feet can be fit onto the bottoms of the legs, and a couple hands can be attached to the arms. Then I'll take a pair of scissors and cut fingers and toes into all the appropriate places. A little pinching and pulling and stretching and rolling will turn those cuts on the hands into fingers, and some poking and prodding with a sculpting tool will make the feet look a little bit more foot-like. I'll then roll some subtle spinal ridges into Charizard's back before working my way around the limbs, refining the detail and musculature. I'll poke a set of divots into the tips of the fingers and toes so I can fit some size-appropriate talons into each before finally texturing all the freshly added clay with stamps and rollers to blend all the added bits into the original body. Some final scales on the toes and fingers, and I can bake the body again to save my progress. With the body baked, I can fit Charizard into my specially designed high-tech holding contraption, then drill a couple holes into each side above the arms and fit some long lengths of armature wire in place. A bit of bending will get the angle of my wings, which I can then brace by adding some smaller wires in the second set of holes and sticking it all together with some metal tape. I'll then add some extra lengths of wire around the wings to build out the wing fingers, sticking them all together with tape as well, which then got me wondering if I can't just build the wings with a layer of tape, alternating the direction of the sticky part, so when I add the extra thin sheets of clay on top, the clay has something to both attach to and to support it while it bakes. I've rolled these sheets of clay as thin as I possibly can using my pasta machine, and I found that the sticky tape actually helps to hold the underside in place so I can blend the two layers together. Normally when I make my wings, I take a single sheet and drape it over just the wingers, which then ends up sagging in the middle, pulling the wingers together, whereas these strips of aluminium work wonders for helping the wings keep their shape. Plus, an unexpected benefit is the wrinkles in the foil translate to wrinkles in the wings that just kind of look cool. For some final leathery looking wing texture, I'll spray the wings with a heavy coating of isopropyl alcohol that gets a stiff brushing followed by some texturing with a soft silicone shaper. I'll flip Charizard back over to do the same to the top of the wings, then give the thicker parts of the wing a bit of scaly texture, and it's into the oven to bake one final time. And yes, I measured ahead of time to make sure this all fits into my oven as a single piece. And with that, Charizard is 99.9% sculpted and ready for a coat of paint. I know I'll be painting with a lot of oranges and beiges, so I'm going to start by giving the entire model a once-over with a bone white base coat to make subsequent layers a little easier to add on top. With base coat in place, I'll give the undersides of the wing a dark blue base coat, then for entirely artistic reasons, I'll paint the top sides of the wings blue as well. This was entirely intentional, and by no means was it the result of me forgetting that Charizard's wings are supposed to be orange on top. More than anything, I was excited to give my color shifting paints a go since I have some blue to green shifting paints that would work perfectly for Charizard, and once applied over the dark blue base coat, they look absolutely terrific. Or at least they do in person. They're kinda hard to see on camera, so you'll just have to take my word for it. The rest of the body is going to get a once-over with a very heavy, bright orange wash, which will soak into the gaps between all the scales, adding some easy highlighting while leaving the tops a lighter color. Once that's dried, I'll use my sponges to work my way through a series of progressively lighter oranges all the way up to an almost white before doing one final coat with a terracotta to really make the scales stand out. I'll then go back to that original bone white to give the chest, belly, tail, neck, hands, and feet a dusting, followed by a lighter highlighting with white to finish it off. Also at this point I realized I'd forgotten to give Charizard a tongue, so I'll take some purplish clay and press that into the mouth, shaping as I go and curing it with the use of my heat gun. I can then paint the inside of the mouth with a series of unifying mouth-colored colors before working my way around the body, painting all the parts white that need to be painted white, starting with the teeth, eyes, fingers, and toes, before coming back through with an off-white wash to add a little gradient to all the sharp bits. I'll then give the white eyes a black base coat, followed by a not full coat of white, a blue glaze, and some little black pupils looking forward. With that, all that's left to do is add some pink hues to the various scars I've scattered around the front of Charizard's face and neck, and I can get to adding the flame to the tail, starting with the addition of some longer lengths of wire, which I'll then run through another long steel straw that is slightly smaller and fits snugly into the already existing straw inside Charizard's mouth. This rod is just strong enough to support the weight of the winged beast, and when I add it to a long length of wood that I've drilled an angled hole into, I'm left with a pretty good flyby pose. Now it's really important to note that up until this point, I've checked a dozen or so times to make sure the cable is working and there's been no issues. So I can fit a little LED bulb into the base of the tail, and it doesn't work. The only thing I can think that's happened is that while I was jamming the steel rod down Charizard's throat, I ended up cutting one of the cables enough to cause the connection to fail. Oh well, shit happens. Maybe I can Photoshop the thumbnail and no one will know. For now though, I'll yank the otherwise useless wiring out and move on to making my fire, safe and confident in the knowledge that nothing else can possibly go wrong. I'm picturing a big line of fire below and behind Charizard since it's flying fast and leaving a trail of destruction behind it, so to bulk out that flame I'll use some more aluminium foil hot glued in place. To make the flame light up, I'll take a strip of long, extra bright lighting that I'll wrap around the foil and run back and forth until I've got full coverage and only a little length of light sticking out the back ready for the connection. Now in the past I've found that hot glue makes the best material for gouts of flame, so I'm going to try and coat the rod in a thick layer of hot glue. However, I quickly realized that I don't have enough hot glue to fully cover the base, so I started panicking and thinking of ways to bulk it out without losing that transparency. My little monkey brain figured that if I used cling film, it would fill the gaps and I could cover it with a much smaller layer of hot glue, but of course even with the cling film in place, we're talking about dozens and dozens of glue sticks. Eventually, I just had to accept defeat and use cotton balls to fill the rest of the base. Now, I probably could have used clear silicone and it would have worked a treat, but that stuff takes a good 24 hours to cure, and at this point I've got about 2 hours of working time left if I want to get this video out on time. And spoiler alert, I did not get it out on time. Otherwise, before I paint the base, I'll replace Charizard's light up flame with a much sadder but perfectly acceptable hot glue flame, building up in layers and poking it as it cools down to achieve a nice flamey appearance. Back to the base, I'll base coat the flame in a bright yellow ink as well as dust the top of the smoke trail, then add some splashes of oranges and reds to the tips of the flames for a little added color, all the while doing the same thing to Charizard's tail off camera. I knew the cotton balls weren't going to look like fire beside the hot glue gout of flame, so I decided to dust them with black in the hopes that it would look like black tarry smoke. However, when I fit Charizard in place and stood back, I realized that I really don't like it. It looks bad. Not just bad, real bad. So in the hopes of salvaging this turd sandwich, I tried dusting the smoke with some reds and oranges so it looked hot inside, and that actually made it look worse. And so at this point, I think I have to accept defeat and start over. The problem being that that strip of light is the only strip I have, so I'm going to have to yank as much of this cotton ball catastrophe apart as I can in the hopes that I can salvage at least enough of the light strip to try and make something a little bit different. Fortunately, this thing is hella long, so even cut in half, there's still plenty to work with. Thankfully, all my yanking didn't break the light, so I can try again, and what I ended up with was this. And this is way more what I had in mind. By making the base a little wider and a little shorter, I was able to make the trail of fire significantly smaller, which means I was able to make it entirely out of the remainder of my hot glue. Now, I'm not saying this is an environmentally friendly build, but look how much better it looks. Also, now it matches Charizard's tail, so finally after a few hiccups I can fit Charizard in place, and that's us done here and onto the Glamour Shots. As always, a big old thank you to the fine folk over on Patreon, and a special hey how are ya to the newest of them. The Body is Dead, Long Live the Head, Navia and Jason Ferris, Team Thunderbullet, Jedi Master Jack, Lizards and Ink, Heather Sparks, Happy Birthday H, Rebinator, This Is to Pay Sunday Matt back for the Wormy Dealy shirt, Big Eggman 69, Megan Star 925, Happy Honeymoon Sasha, Malachias, Moth Muncher, and I'm so sorry. You are the little but strong metal rod that supports this beer-belly dragon of a channel. I know this was one day late, but just look at that fire. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.